The scream cut through the lounge like broken glass. Plates shattered. Chairs scraped backward. Every head turned as two women stood locked in fury, their voices rising above the music, above the laughter, above the lies that had brought them there. In the middle of it all stood Moses, once admired, once untouchable, now frozen, exposed, stripped bare by the very secrets he thought he controlled. Phones were raised. Whispers spread like wildfire. In that single moment, his carefully balanced world collapsed in public view, and Cloverfield feasted on the chaos. What no one in that room knew was that this explosion had been quietly arranged long before the first insult was thrown, long before the first tear fell. Across town, in a quiet living room far removed from the noise, a woman sat alone, hands folded, heart steady. She did not shout. She did not rush to the scene. She had already fought her battle elsewhere, on her knees, in silence, in prayer. While the city watched scandal unfold, she rested in the calm that comes when truth finally steps into the light. The irony was sharp. The loudest destruction was born from the quietest resolve. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be brought to light. Luke 8, verse 17. That night was proof. But how did it come to this? How did a man who seemed to have it all lose everything in one evening? How did love turn into strategy and silence become power? And who was the unseen hand that set truth in motion without ever raising its voice? To understand the weight of that moment, the screams, the shame, the public unmasking, we must walk back to where it all began, to a marriage admired by many, to a city buzzing with gossip, and to a woman whose greatest weapon was faith guided by wisdom. So sit back, relax, and stay with me as we delve into this interesting and remarkable story. Cloverfield had a way of waking up before its people did, as though the city itself stretched, yawned, and leaned into the day before anyone opened their eyes. Morning vendors argued cheerfully over space, balconies carried yesterday's gossip into today's air, and the streets hummed with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. In the heart of this lively place stood the home of Moses and Rosemary, a house that many admired from the outside and quietly envied from within. In the early days, their union felt like a carefully composed melody, each note placed with intention. Moses had arrived in Cloverfield years earlier with rolled-up blueprints and restless ambition, believing the city would either crown him or crush him. Rosemary met him when he was still unknown, when his hands smelled more of ink and coffee than money. She saw a man full of dreams, and he saw a woman whose calm felt like shelter from the storm. They married before Moses' name began to echo through offices and construction sites, before success became a language he spoke fluently. Back then, love was simple, laughter was frequent, and evenings were slow. Rosemary would sit by the window as Cloverfield buzzed below, whispering prayers not out of desperation, but gratitude. She often recalled the words, "Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain," from Psalm 127, verse 1, believing their home was more than bricks and vows. Their marriage, in those early seasons, felt like a shared garden, carefully tended, watered with patience, and protected from harsh winds. People said they were well matched, and for a long while that seemed like an understatement rather than a compliment. As Moses' career gained traction, Cloverfield began to open its doors wider to him. His designs rose from the ground like confident declarations, each structure telling the city that he had arrived to stay. Invitations followed success the way ants follow sugar. Dinners, meetings, handshakes, and applause became part of his daily bread. Rosemary watched this transformation with quiet pride, never mistaking busyness for importance. She knew how easily a man could be swallowed by applause if he forgot where his journey began. Still, she supported him fully, reminding him gently to eat, to rest, to pray. There was an old saying her mother used often: "When fortune smiles too much, check if it's hiding something." Rosemary never said it aloud, but she kept it close to her heart. In the evenings, Moses spoke excitedly about projects while Rosemary listened, her presence steady, her eyes attentive. She believed listening was an art, one Moses had yet to master. Cloverfield, for all its brightness, was a city where appearances wore heavy makeup, and Rosemary understood that discernment was more valuable than decoration. She prayed for her husband in the quiet moments, asking that success would not turn his head or harden his heart. Her prayers were soft, spoken like secrets between her and God. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding," she would murmur, recalling Proverbs 3, verse 5. She didn't know then how deeply those words would be tested. To her, they were a reminder to stay grounded while life climbed higher. Moses, meanwhile, mistook his growing influence for invincibility, unaware that pride often walks in quietly before it demands the front seat. In those earlier years, Rosemary's grace was not performative. It was lived. She moved through Cloverfield with a dignity that made people lower their voices when she passed, not out of fear, but respect. She volunteered quietly, avoided unnecessary attention, and carried herself like someone who understood that still waters often ran deep. Moses admired this about her, even if he didn't fully understand it. To him, Rosemary was dependable, constant, always there. And therein lay the danger. He began to take her steadiness for granted, like air that never runs out. Yet Rosemary noticed the subtle shifts long before they became obvious. Moses' laughter changed tone. His silences grew longer. The man who once hurried home now found reasons to linger elsewhere. Still, she chose patience over panic. A soft answer turns away wrath, she reminded herself from Proverbs 15, verse 1, believing that peace was not weakness but strength under control. She believed marriages, like houses, required regular inspection, not just admiration from afar. In the stillness of night, while the city outside traded secrets and rumors, Rosemary prayed again, not because she suspected betrayal, but because she sensed imbalance. She asked for wisdom, not confrontation, clarity, not chaos. Her prayers were like seeds planted deep, unseen but alive. She did not yet know that those seeds would soon break through hardened soil. For now, she held on to faith the way sailors hold on to stars, trusting direction even when the waters looked calm. Cloverfield loved stories, and it loved telling them louder than necessary. People whispered about Moses' success, speculated about his wealth, and admired Rosemary's composure, assuming she lived a life untouched by trouble. But Rosemary knew that even the smoothest roads could hide cracks. She often reflected on Ecclesiastes 7, verse 8. "Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit," letting the words settle into her bones. The early days of her marriage taught her patience, not because things were difficult, but because patience was preparation. She remembered their first tiny apartment, where laughter echoed off bare walls and dreams were shared over simple meals. Those memories anchored her, reminding her that love had once been enough without applause. Moses, however, was slowly forgetting that version of himself. Cloverfield's energy fed his ego, and admiration became a currency he spent carelessly. Rosemary did not chase him with suspicion or questions. She believed timing was everything, and that rushing truth only scattered it. Instead, she prayed with intention, asking God to guard her heart and reveal what needed to be seen when the time was right. "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still," from Exodus 14, verse 14, became her quiet anthem. At this point, there was no scandal, no confrontation, no visible fracture, only the subtle creak of a door beginning to open. And while Cloverfield danced loudly around them, Rosemary stood firm, grounded in prayer, unaware that the foundation of her marriage was about to be tested by fire she did not start, but would ultimately survive. Moses' world began to stretch wider than his marriage, not all at once, but inch by inch, the way daylight slowly pushes darkness out without asking permission. Cloverfield rewarded ambition generously, and Moses drank deeply from that cup. Meetings blurred into dinners, dinners into late-night calls, and late nights into excuses polished smooth with confidence. He told himself he was building a legacy, that every sacrifice was temporary, that Rosemary would understand because she always did. Yet understanding, when leaned on too heavily, can quietly turn into neglect. At the firm, Amelia arrived like a sharp wind, efficient, observant, and eager to prove her worth. She admired Moses openly, praised his vision, laughed at his jokes with a spark that fed his ego. Moses noticed, then pretended not to, then slowly began to enjoy it. There is an old saying that fits too well: the snake doesn't strike until you stop watching the grass. He convinced himself this was harmless admiration, nothing more than professional closeness. But boundaries, once blurred, rarely redraw themselves. Cloverfield thrived on closeness, on whispered alliances and private conversations that felt important simply because they were hidden. Moses liked how Amelia listened without reminding him of who he used to be. Meanwhile, Rosemary continued her quiet routines, unaware that a hairline crack had formed. She prayed for her husband's protection daily, often recalling Proverbs 4, verse 23. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. She spoke the words not knowing how urgently they applied. Moses' heart, once anchored, was beginning to drift, carried by tides he refused to acknowledge. As Moses' projects grew larger, so did his appetite for admiration. Success has a way of changing mirrors. Suddenly a man sees not who he is, but who he enjoys becoming. Kate entered the picture, polished, poised, and born into privilege. She was the only daughter of a powerful client, raised in rooms where confidence was inherited and expectations were unspoken. Their initial conversations were professional, but charm has a way of slipping through formal cracks. Kate saw Moses as brilliant, self-made, and excitingly different from the men she had always known. Moses saw her as refined validation, a symbol that he had truly arrived. Their conversations moved from boardrooms to restaurants, from plans to possibilities. And Moses told himself another lie, that this connection was earned, that he deserved something extra after years of hard work. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs 16 verse 18 warned, though Moses was no longer listening for such cautions. He compartmentalized his life carefully, stacking lies like bricks, and trusting they would hold. At home, he remained pleasant, attentive enough to avoid suspicion, affectionate just enough to seem unchanged. Rosemary noticed fatigue in his eyes, but she assumed it was the weight of responsibility. She believed love meant trusting without interrogating. She did not know that while she prayed for unity, Moses was learning the dangerous art of division, splitting his words, his time, and eventually his conscience. Amelia and Kate existed in separate worlds, carefully curated by Moses' selective honesty. To Amelia, he was misunderstood, overworked, and quietly lonely. Kate, he was devoted, constrained only by timing and circumstance. He played each role with precision, believing intelligence could outsmart consequence. Cloverfield encouraged such games. Secrets were currency, and discretion was praised as sophistication. Moses felt untouchable, like a man walking a tightrope, convinced the net beneath him was permanent. Yet every message sent, every receipt hidden, every delayed return home added weight to the rope. He began checking his phone obsessively, guarding it like a vault. Rosemary noticed this change, not with suspicion, but with concern. She wondered when silence had replaced conversation. Still, she chose prayer over probing. She remembered Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1. For everything there is a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven, trusting that clarity would come in its appointed hour. She fasted quietly 1 week, asking God to restore balance in her home. While Moses mastered deception, Rosemary deepened discernment. She did not yet see the storm, but she sensed pressure in the air, like birds flying low before heavy rain. Moses mistook her quietness for ignorance, not realizing that stillness can be the loudest form of awareness. Cloverfield continued buzzing, unaware that 3 lives were being tied together by one man's recklessness. Moses juggled schedules with the confidence of a performer who had never dropped a prop. But lies demand maintenance, and maintenance demands energy. He grew restless, irritable, impatient. The man who once prayed with Rosemary before sleep now claimed exhaustion. Rosemary felt the distance, but refused to chase it. He who trusts in his own heart is a fool, but whoever walks wisely will be delivered. Proverbs 28 verse 26 echoed in her spirit, shaping her response. She chose wisdom over confrontation, faith over fear. Moses, however, was mistaking silence for safety. He did not see that Rosemary's prayers were not passive. They were active appeals to a God who exposes darkness gently before he does so publicly. Cloverfield had a saying of its own, "What's hidden in daylight will shout at midnight." Moses was approaching that midnight without knowing it. Every step he took away from truth brought him closer to exposure. Meanwhile, Rosemary continued to tend the home, speak kindly, and pray deeply. She did not know the details, but she trusted the process. The cracks were forming, spreading quietly beneath polished surfaces. And though Moses believed he was in control, the truth was already moving, patient and unstoppable, toward the moment when masks would no longer hold. The truth did not arrive with thunder or warning. It slipped into the room like a quiet guest who knew exactly where to sit. It was an ordinary evening in Cloverfield, the kind that carried no sense of ceremony. The city buzzed below their apartment, laughter and engines weaving together like an old song. Moses had rushed out earlier, distracted and hurried, leaving behind his phone on the kitchen counter. Rosemary noticed it only because it vibrated once, then again, persistent like a knock that refused to be ignored. At first, she paid it no mind. She had learned that marriage required trust, not surveillance. But when the screen lit up again, a name she didn't recognize glowed against the dim light. Rosemary hesitated, her heart pausing between instinct and restraint. There is an idiom her grandmother used to say, "When the ground trembles, don't blame the wind." She picked up the phone, not with suspicion, but with a strange calm she couldn't explain. What she saw did not scream, it whispered sharply. Words laced with familiarity, affection dripping between lines, laughter preserved in text. Then images followed, too personal to misunderstand, too deliberate to excuse. Receipts sat neatly archived, silent witnesses to dinners she had not attended, and gifts she had never seen. Each discovery felt like a drop of cold water on her spine. Still, she did not scream or crumble. She remembered Proverbs 18 verse 13, "To answer before listening, that is folly and shame." And she listened carefully, letting the truth reveal itself fully before responding. The knife had cut deep, but Rosemary chose not to bleed loudly. She sat down slowly, as though sudden movement might shatter the fragile stillness holding her together. Pain arrived next, heavy and uninvited, settling into her chest like an unwelcome lodger. Questions crowded her mind, bumping into one another without answers. Why him? Why now? Why her? Yet Rosemary did not allow despair to take the driver's seat. She had learned long ago that emotions make poor navigators. Instead, she breathed deeply, steadying herself. Tears came, but they were quiet, sliding down her cheeks without sound. She felt betrayed, yes, but more than that, she felt insulted by the carelessness of it all. Moses had not only broken trust, he had underestimated her discernment. The heart is deceitful above all things. Jeremiah 17 verse 9 echoed in her thoughts, not as condemnation but clarity. She realized then that love does not make one blind. It makes one hopeful. She replayed moments she had dismissed, the guarded phone, the unexplained absences, the sudden generosity followed by emotional distance. The signs had been there, hiding in plain sight, like ink invisible until exposed to heat. Rosemary stood up and walked to the bathroom mirror. She looked at her reflection, eyes red but steady. She refused to let heartbreak reduce her dignity. There was an old saying she believed deeply. When you lose your way, stand still until your soul catches up. That night she stood still. She did not call Moses. She did not confront him. She allowed the truth to settle, knowing that rushed reactions often serve regret better than justice. When the weight of discovery threatened to overwhelm her, Rosemary did what she had always done. She prayed. Not the kind of prayer filled with anger or demands, but one soaked in honesty. She knelt by her bed, the same place where she had prayed for her marriage in gentler times. Her words came slowly at first, then poured out like water, finally finding a crack in a dam. She told God everything she could not say aloud. The confusion, the hurt, the disbelief. She asked not for revenge, but for wisdom. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God. From James 1 verse 5 surfaced in her spirit, steadying her voice. She prayed for strength to act rightly, not emotionally. She prayed for clarity to see beyond the pain. In that quiet moment, something shifted. The hurt did not disappear, but it no longer ruled her. Prayer became her anchor, holding her steady while waves of betrayal crashed around her. She understood then that silence could be strategic, not submissive. There was power in waiting, in letting God order the steps she could not yet see. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established, Proverbs 16 verse 3 reassured her. Rosemary rose from her knees with swollen eyes but a settled heart. She knew this was not the end of her story. It was a turning point. From that night on, Rosemary observed everything differently. She spoke when necessary, listened when required, and watched always. Moses returned home late, offering explanations that once might have sufficed. She nodded, not because she believed him, but because she understood timing. There is an idiom that says, "The truth is a patient hunter." Rosemary let it hunt. She moved through her days with deliberate normalcy, masking the storm within. Cloverfield carried on with its noise and gossip, unaware of the quiet reckoning taking place behind closed doors. Rosemary's heart still ached, but it no longer wavered. She had crossed from innocence into awareness, and there was no turning back. Each morning she prayed Psalm 119, verse 105, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path," trusting that her next steps would be revealed in time. She did not yet know how the story would unfold, only that she would not act out of fear. Betrayal had knocked her down, but prayer helped her stand upright again. And while Moses believed his secrets were safe, Rosemary understood a deeper truth. What is hidden in darkness does not need to be dragged into light when light is already on its way. Rosemary's silence was no longer innocence. It was intention sharpened by prayer. After the night truth revealed itself through glowing screens and quiet tears, she moved through her days with a composure that would have fooled even the most watchful eye. She laughed when laughter was expected, nodded when Moses spoke, and played her role so convincingly that even guilt grew comfortable around her. Inside, however, her thoughts were deliberate and measured, each one placed carefully like stones across a river she knew she would soon cross. She understood that reacting too quickly would only scatter the truth, like dust kicked up by hurried feet. There is an old idiom that says, "Wisdom doesn't shout from rooftops. It waits at crossroads." Rosemary waited. She paid attention to patterns, not promises. She noticed how Moses' phone never left his side, how his tone shifted when certain names appeared on the screen, how excuses arrived before questions were even asked. Each detail became a thread, and Rosemary quietly began to weave. She leaned heavily into prayer, not as an escape, but as preparation. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, Proverbs 21 verse 5 reminded her, steadying her resolve. She did not feel powerful. She felt guided. Prayer, she realized, was not about changing God's mind, but aligning her steps with wisdom greater than her own. In Cloverfield, where gossip thrived and patience was rare, Rosemary chose the harder road, restraint. She trusted that timing, when surrendered to God, could become a weapon sharper than anger. Days passed, then weeks, each one revealing more than the last. Moses' routine became predictable in its deception, and predictability, Rosemary knew, was a liability. One evening, while Moses showered, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Rosemary did not rush to it. She waited until the vibration stopped, then picked it up calmly. She saw the message that anchored her plan, a meeting scheduled at a private lounge, tucked away from Cloverfield's usual noise. Amelia's name sat there plainly, no longer hidden behind coded language. Rosemary felt a flicker of pain, but it passed quickly, replaced by clarity. She did not panic. She did not confront. Instead, she whispered a prayer of thanks for confirmation. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed. Luke 8 verse 17 echoed softly in her mind. She copied the details mentally, then returned the phone exactly as she found it. That night she prayed longer than usual, not asking for courage to expose Moses, but for strength to remain steady when the moment arrived. She understood now that truth, when revealed properly, did not need embellishment. It stood on its own. Cloverfield slept loudly that night, unaware that a quiet arrangement was forming beneath its restless surface. Rosemary lay awake, not consumed by fear, but focused, like an archer holding breath before release. The next step required precision, not impulse. Rosemary knew of Kate, not personally, but enough to understand her world. She had seen her name often enough on Moses' phone to recognize its significance. Carefully, Rosemary copied Kate's number, her hand steady, her mind calm. She did not feel guilt. She felt purpose. There is an idiom that says, when truth is chained, wisdom picks the lock. Rosemary was not fabricating lies. She was simply allowing reality to collide with itself. On the day of the meeting, she waited until afternoon before making the call. She masked her voice, keeping it professional, composed, unremarkable. She introduced herself as a manager from the lounge, speaking with practiced courtesy. She told Kate that Moses had arranged a surprise, that he wanted her there that evening. The words were simple, unprovocative, carefully chosen. Kate responded with excitement, gratitude lacing her voice. Rosemary ended the call politely and set the phone down. Only then did she exhale. She went to her bedroom, closed the door, and prayed. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in Him, and He will act. Psalm 37 verse 5 grounded her racing thoughts. She asked for peace, not pleasure, justice, not spectacle. She did not ask to witness the fallout. Her role, she knew, was complete. Like a farmer who plants and waits, Rosemary trusted the harvest to come without her interference. That evening, as Cloverfield dressed itself in neon lights and laughter, Rosemary stayed home. She brewed tea, opened her Bible, and sat by the window. Somewhere across town, paths were converging, unaware of each other's presence, until it would be too late to retreat. Rosemary did not imagine the scene. She did not indulge curiosity. She focused instead on gratitude that she had been given discernment before bitterness could consume her. Be still, and know that I am God, Psalm 46 verse 10 reminded her, calming any lingering tremor in her hands. She understood now that power did not always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looked like restraint, patience, and faith working quietly together. Moses believed he was controlling the narrative, unaware that his own words and actions had already written the climax. Rosemary felt no triumph, only resolve. Whatever happened next would happen without her presence, without her voice raised in accusation. The truth would speak for itself. And in that stillness, surrounded by prayer and quiet trust, Rosemary felt something she hadn't felt since the night of discovery, peace. Not because the pain was gone, but because she had placed it where it belonged, into hands far steadier than her own. The private lounge sat tucked between two glass towers in Cloverfield, pretending to be discreet while thriving on secrecy. That evening it glowed with dim amber lights and low music that slid easily into conversations meant to stay hidden. Moses arrived first, relaxed, confident, believing the night was safely under his control. Amelia joined him shortly after, dressed with intention, her ambition stitched neatly into her confidence. They laughed easily, the kind of laughter born from shared secrets and stolen moments. To them, the world beyond their table did not exist. Moses leaned closer, whispering promises that cost him nothing in the moment, his words smooth as polished stone. Amelia listened, her eyes bright, believing she was chosen, special, different. They toasted to progress, a word Moses used often when he meant indulgence. Meanwhile, outside the lounge, Kate stepped out of her car, heart light, excitement bubbling over. She believed she was walking into a surprise meant just for her, a confirmation of everything Moses had told her. She adjusted her dress, smoothed her hair, and smiled to herself. There is an idiom that says, "Joy walks fast when it doesn't know where it's going." Kate entered the lounge with that kind of joy, her eyes scanning the room eagerly until they landed on Moses. His smile froze on her face. Time slowed, stretching painfully as she took in the scene, Moses' hand resting where it shouldn't, Amelia's laughter too intimate to misunderstand. The truth struck her like cold rain. Her heart sank, then hardened. The words of a whisperer are like delicious morsels, Proverbs 18 verse 8 warned, and suddenly every sweet word Moses had ever spoken tasted bitter. Kate stepped forward, heels clicking sharply against the floor, each step fueled by disbelief turning into fury. The confrontation cut through the lounge like a blade through silk. Kate's voice trembled at first, then steadied as shock gave way to anger. She demanded answers, her questions sharp and relentless. Moses stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly, eyes darting like a trapped animal's. Amelia looked between them, confusion quickly transforming into realization. The air grew thick with accusation. Amelia's voice rose, defensive and wounded, as she challenged Kate's right to question anything. Kate fired back, each word laced with disbelief and pride. Patrons turned to watch. Phones emerged quietly, Cloverfield's appetite for drama instantly awakened. Plates rattled, a glass shattered against the floor, punctuating the chaos. Moses tried to speak, but his words drowned beneath overlapping voices. Lies, once carefully stacked, collapsed all at once. The wicked are ensnared by the transgression of their lips. Proverbs 12 verse 13 rang true in that moment. Amelia accused Moses of manipulation, of promises whispered behind office doors. Kate accused him of deception, of presenting exclusivity while sharing himself freely. Their anger shifted from each other toward him, uniting them briefly in shared outrage. Insults flew, stripping Moses of the image he had so carefully curated. He shrank under the weight of public exposure, his confidence evaporating like mist under heat. The lounge manager hovered nervously, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Cloverfield thrived on scenes like this, and by morning the story would be everywhere. Moses felt it then, the heavy realization that control was an illusion, and consequences had a voice far louder than excuses. As the argument escalated, dignity was the first casualty. Amelia hurled accusations with tears in her eyes, calling Moses a coward who hid behind charm. Kate's disappointment burned hotter, her words cutting deeper because they were measured, deliberate. She spoke of trust broken, of being reduced to an option rather than a choice. Moses tried to explain, to justify, to soften the blow with half-truths, but every attempt only fueled their anger. Whoever conceals hatred with lying lips and spreads slander is a fool. Proverbs 10 verse 18 echoed silently through the chaos. Chairs toppled, drawing gasps from onlookers. The once intimate table became a battleground. Moses felt exposed, not just to the room, but to himself. He saw his reflection in the mirrored wall, sweat on his brow, fear in his eyes, and barely recognized the man staring back. This was not the architect admired across Cloverfield. This was a man undone by his own appetite. Amelia finally turned away from him, her voice breaking as she declared she wanted nothing more to do with him. Kate followed suit, her final words cold and precise, promising consequences he could not outrun. The noise slowly subsided, leaving behind broken glass, murmurs, and Moses standing alone amid the wreckage. Shame wrapped itself around him like a heavy coat. He knew then that reputation, once cracked, rarely returned to its original form. Cloverfield would remember this night, even if he wished it away. Across town, Rosemary sat quietly, unaware of the specific details yet sensing the shift in the air. She felt no triumph, only a solemn confirmation that truth had finally surfaced. While Moses faced the fallout, Rosemary knelt once more, her prayer calm and resolute. "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." Psalm 23 verse 5 came to her mind, not as gloating, but reassurance. She had not raised her voice or lifted her hand, yet justice moved all the same. Back at the lounge, Moses left alone, the night swallowing him whole. His phone buzzed relentlessly with missed calls and messages, but none offered comfort. His city lights seemed harsher now, exposing rather than flattering. He walked to his car slowly, each step heavy with regret. There is an idiom that says, "When the mask falls, even friends look like strangers." Moses felt utterly alone. He did not yet know what awaited him at home, only that the life he had balanced so arrogantly had tipped beyond recovery. And while Cloverfield buzzed with retellings and exaggerations, one truth stood firm beneath the noise. What was done in secrecy had finally found its stage, and there would be no curtain call to undo it. Moses returned home long after midnight, carrying the weight of the evening like a sack of stones slung across his back. Cloverfield's lights no longer felt celebratory. They mocked him as he walked, each reflection in the glass reminding him of what had unraveled. When he unlocked the door, the house greeted him with an unfamiliar quiet. Rosemary sat in the living room, dressed simply, her posture calm, her eyes steady. She looked nothing like a woman waiting to explode. That unsettled him more than anger ever could. He began to speak immediately, words tumbling over each other, apologies stitched together with desperation. He blamed confusion, misunderstanding, temptation, stress, anything that sounded less damning than truth. But Rosemary raised a hand gently, and the room fell silent. There is an idiom that says, "When wisdom enters, noise exits." She did not interrupt him out of cruelty, but out of clarity. When she finally spoke, her voice was level, almost tender, yet unyielding. She told him she knew everything, not from rumors or accusations, but from what had been revealed quietly over time. She spoke of trust broken not once, but repeatedly, and of vows treated like suggestions rather than sacred promises. Moses dropped to his knees, pleading, tears streaming freely now, the arrogance of yesterday stripped bare. He begged for another chance, promising change, repentance, devotion. Rosemary listened without flinching. She had already grieved the marriage long before this night. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. Proverbs 14 verse 12 surfaced in her heart, steadying her resolve. She told Moses softly that forgiveness did not always require restoration, and repentance did not erase consequence. Her calm was not coldness, it was conviction formed through prayer and pain. Moses realized then that he was not arguing with a wounded woman, but standing before one who had already made peace with the truth. Rosemary stood and walked to the bedroom, returning with neatly arranged papers. Divorce papers. She placed them on the table between them like final punctuation at the end of a long sentence. Moses stared, disbelief washing over him anew. He tried again to bargain, to reason, to remind her of their history, their early days, their shared prayers. Rosemary acknowledged those memories, honoring them without letting them chain her. She explained that love without trust was a house without foundation, and she refused to live beneath collapsing walls. Better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and angry person. Proverbs 21 verse 19 echoed in her spirit, not as insult, but truth. She told him she had prayed not for revenge, but for direction, and every prayer had led her here. Moses accused her of planning his humiliation, unaware of how deeply that accusation missed the mark. Rosemary reminded him gently that exposure was not her doing. It was the natural fruit of hidden choices ripening in public. There is an idiom that says, "What you plant in secret grows in daylight." She had not forced his hand or spoken his lies. She had simply stepped aside and let truth stand upright. Moses broke down fully then, the weight of loss pressing into him. He realized he had gambled everything for temporary thrills and lost the only thing that truly anchored him. Rosemary watched with compassion, not satisfaction. Her heart still ached, but it no longer wavered. She had chosen peace over permanence, obedience over attachment. She signed the papers calmly, her hand steady, her breath even. Moses signed last, his signature shaky, sealing the end of a chapter he had once taken for granted. In the days that followed, Cloverfield buzzed louder than ever. Stories spread, embellished and exaggerated, Moses' name becoming shorthand for scandal. Business partners distanced themselves, clients withdrew, invitations dried up. The city that once celebrated him now consumed him with gossip. Moses felt exposed everywhere he went, as though shame followed him like a shadow that refused to fade. He tried calling Rosemary repeatedly, leaving messages thick with regret, but she did not respond. Silence, he learned, can be a mirror. Alone in his apartment, he replayed every decision, every ignored warning, every moment he chose ego over integrity. The one who sows to please his flesh will reap destruction. Galatians 6 verse 8 rang painfully true. Meanwhile, Rosemary moved quietly, packing her belongings with deliberate care. She did not rush. She did not linger. Each item she folded felt like releasing a memory gently rather than tearing it away. She prayed as she packed, thanking God for strength she did not know she possessed. When she finally left the house, she did so without spectacle. No farewell speech, no lingering glance. She walked away knowing that obedience sometimes requires walking alone. Cloverfield noticed her absence, but not her process. What the city did not see were the nights she cried softly, the mornings she rebuilt herself piece by piece, the prayers whispered through exhaustion. "The Lord is my strength and my shield." Psalm 28 verse 7 sustained her when grief resurfaced unexpectedly. She did not pretend the journey was easy. She simply refused to let pain define her destination. Time passed as it always does, smoothing sharp edges without erasing scars. Moses remained in Cloverfield, bearing the quiet consequences of his choices. Some doors reopened cautiously, others remained firmly shut. He learned humility the hard way, stripped of illusion and forced into reflection. Rosemary, on the other hand, found a different rhythm. She relocated to a quieter part of the city, one where anonymity allowed healing. She rebuilt her life slowly, intentionally, grounding each step in prayer. She learned again to laugh freely, to trust cautiously, to rest deeply. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness. Psalm 23 verse 3 became more than scripture. It became testimony. Rosemary did not emerge hardened. She emerged refined. Her silence had spoken louder than confrontation, her faith louder than fury. Cloverfield would never know the full story, and she did not need it to. She understood now that vindication did not come from being seen as right, but from being at peace. As for Moses, the scandal lingered like an old bruise, reminding him daily of what unchecked pride could destroy. Rosemary carried no such burden. She had placed it where it belonged, trusting God to handle what she could not. And in that trust, she found freedom, not because the past no longer existed, but because it no longer controlled her. Dear listeners, this story is a reminder that character is revealed in secrecy, not in public applause. What you protect in the dark will either preserve you or expose you when the light comes. Deceit may feel clever for a season, but it always overplays its hand. The heart cannot carry double lives without eventually collapsing under their weight. Be sure your sin will find you out. Numbers 32:23 is not a threat, it is a truth. Let this also teach that silence guided by wisdom is stronger than noise driven by anger. Not every battle is won by shouting. some are won on one's knees. Prayer does not make you weak or passive. It aligns you with timing, clarity, and justice that human emotion cannot achieve. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14, verse 14. Finally, understand this clearly. Love without integrity is a ticking clock. Faithfulness is not optional, and trust once shattered is never owed a second rebuilding. Choose honesty even when no one is watching, because reputation may impress people, but integrity answers to God. Above all else, guard your heart. Proverbs 4, verse 23. What you guard today will determine what you lose or keep tomorrow.